really, this is great for our listeners. It's a strategy execution system company that has productized all components of strategy execution. This allows companies of any size across any business segment to successfully execute their strategy at a cost they can afford. And as we've said on this program already, unless you have a sustainable strategy system, you're leaving money on the table.
That's so true, Duffy. And just to give the listeners kind of a juxtaposition to that, many organizations use as their strategy execution system the once-a-year conversation they have about strategy, and then whatever their monthly meeting cadence is, whatever that happens to be, and then it's their budget.
So once a year, that's not going to cut it.
Right. And even if you're talking about things, it doesn't mean you're going to execute well. So there's a science to strategy execution, and we have productized that science so that any organization of any size across any business segment can actually win by deploying this. And the way to understand it is through the organizational hierarchy of needs.
That's right. So as we do this program, and we're going to say this every week so people know, you can join us with www.leaderdialogue.com. You can look at that hierarchy and follow along. Now, last week we had the founder of SwimKids of Georgia, and that you went in and you assessed their business and you talked about their strategy, and I believe you found they were operating 29% of what they could be doing?
Right. So SwimKids of Georgia has a great mission for everything that they've done. They've been able to see a lot of success. And I believe they mentioned that Nadyne started the business about 30 years ago. And that's quite an accomplishment in and of itself, because a lot of businesses do not last for 30 years. And then to be able to say, 30 years in, what can we do better? So we went and partnered with them, and in conjunction with their own team, said, hey, what's going on? Tell us about what you guys do. What are your objectives? What are your goals? How can you go from where you're at to where you want to be? What are those gaps? And so really looking at both strengths and weaknesses as a business to say, what can you improve? And I think that we found some really interesting insights. And again, just as a huge shout out to them, because they were very open and willing to actively work on all of those things. And as Jessica mentioned, who's their COO, one of her key insights from that process was the capacity dilemma that they've experienced or seen, where they just have the opportunity to really expand capacity, which means saving lives.
And that's the thing. They had such a clear mission. Not every company can say this, but they want to save more kids' lives. They want to teach even babies survival skills if they find themselves in water. Here's another thing that was really great about their business. They had great Yelp reviews. I mean, everyone who reviews them gives them top marks. Mm-hmm. That's something you can't, that would seem to me to be one of the hardest things to fix in a business. So they've got great customer satisfaction.
Yeah, it's very significant. And again, hats off to Nadyne and Jessica for their ability to do that. That means that they're delivering great service and their customers love them. And in spite of that, which is a great thing to have, like you said, they have this opportunity to even do better. So the theme of today's discussion is leaving money on the table. And so it impacts them as business owners, but it also, more importantly, impacts their mission, because there are clients and children that they're not serving that they could be serving.
Absolutely. So it's interesting. One of the takeaways that we discussed briefly last week that I would love for us to be able to dive into a little bit more is when you think about that organizational hierarchy of need, I think we'll really want to focus on organizational effectiveness and really talking about how do you standardize your processes so that you can create more capacity in a way that's not just feeling like more work faster for employees, but really creates that flow so you have the capacity to take on those added volumes in a way that's not stressful for everyone involved.
Yeah, that's so true, Jennifer. So we, for the listeners, are going to be referring to the organizational hierarchy of need. So maybe you can provide a little direction to them as to how they can follow along.
That's right. If you have your computer, go ahead and go on to www.leaderdialogue.com, and you're going to see that hierarchy right there on the main page, and take us through that.
So organizational effectiveness is the fourth level down. For the listeners, if you're on that webpage, and we'll give you a minute to get there, we're going to be spending a fair amount of time there as it relates to the SwimKids of Georgia example. But just as a refresher, it all starts with strategy.
Right.
If you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, everything else below that is going to be troubled.
And one thing just to add that I think is important and not always recognized is that a mission does not necessarily mean a strategy.
Gotcha.
They're two very different components. They're obviously linked, but you can have a clear mission but not have an understanding of how your strategy will help you achieve that mission.
Right, and as the listeners can see on the radio program, there are 3 particular things about strategy execution that we unpack on that website. The first is you have to differentiate your organization in the market relative to competition. If you don't do that, then you're not going to win. The second is you have to engage your associates to execute seamlessly, right? So the example that I give sometimes as a parent, because I have a lot of children, we have 7 children to be exact.
7, yes.
Yeah, 5 boys and 2 girls, is that if you are telling your kid that you want them to clean their room every day and just dress semi-appropriately for school, and then you just say, and I don't want to talk to you about that again.
Oh, good luck with that.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. So you can't just assume that because you've developed a strategy and you've told your associates that somehow automagically they're just going to do that work. That actually is a process. There's a structure to it. So in number 2, when you're engaging your associates to execute seamlessly, that's actually a process. And then the third item is to measure performance to expectations, which means you need to know what those are, and then adjust course as necessary, which is also a science. Like, how do you adjust course? So all of that is included in a strategy execution system. All of that is what we were referring to as the productized approach. And as we talk about SwimKids of Georgia, we're going to unpack that. And I think it'll be interesting for the
So one of the things that was interesting to me last week that Nadyne and Jessica really pointed out was within the first thing you mentioned is differentiation. Because there are different companies, just like any business, we all have competitors. And when they discussed, for instance, what differentiates them, it's really their approach. They have a very novel, proven approach where they can guarantee basically that you will have your child swimming as long as you follow their approach, following a 6-week period, which, again, as a mom, I think is quite phenomenal. My son did swim lessons for a while, and he was going for a few months, and every week he would go for about an hour. And I remember Nadyne, the first question she said was, well, can he swim? And I was like, well, no.
Right, she was
but
very
he had
clear about that.
So much fun. And so that to me is an instant differentiator, like, oh, wow, I was probably missing out. But the other side of that is that how do you make sure your customers know that differentiation?
Right.
Because it can't just be, well, they're just going to learn because people like me, or people will know that's just how great we are. You can't assume people know what makes you different in the market.
And so just to confirm that we were really listening well to Nadyne and Jessica, here's what they said. They said that if you're splashing around with your child in the pool and they think it's fun, and then all of a sudden they're going to the edge by themselves and you shout out, stop, they're confused. And when you approach this, and this is their approach, you address it from a way that enables the child to succeed and be able to flip over and get to the side and protect themselves. And that way they're learning how to manage the water effectively and not just as a fun interaction.
And how relatable is that to when we send mixed messages to employees?
Yes.
We do the same thing, right? Work on
Right.
this, but make sure you come by me first, or
Right.
that let me approve it before you actually do it. There's
Right.
a lot of false starts that
Right.
essentially go into that process every single day.
Right.
Well, and for them, I remember them saying the first thing they noticed, talking about employees and everyone being on the same page, is that people at the front desk, who are often the first people to answer the phone or greet someone if they walk in, even they need help on the strategy and using the same language, as you said, getting the message out, how we're different and what we can do for you and the time limit. They felt like that was something that needed to be improved.
That's absolutely right. And the term for that is standard work. Standard work is simple. It just means that you're defining exactly what you want done at each phase of the customer delivery. So in a hamburger joint, it's make sure you put the burger between the buns, and it would be nice if you put the lettuce and the tomato and the mayonnaise on first before you closed it.
Gotcha.
Right? It's standard work. If you do it backwards, it's not going to work out very well. So we'll get to that more when we talk about organizational effectiveness. And Jennifer, let me just tee that up, and then I'm going to pass it off to you. So if the listeners are looking at the organizational needs hierarchy, the very first thing under strategy execution is financial performance. Now remember, financial performance is a big indicator. If you're doing everything well, you're gonna do well financially. If you're not doing everything well, that's going to be a big symptom. And what we learned with SwimKids of Georgia is they were leaving money on the table. It turns out that even though they were delivering significant customer value, right? Their Yelp scores are at 5 and better, and everybody loves what they're doing. We learned that their capacity was at 29%. That means they're leaving 61% of their capacity on the table, and that capacity translates into financial performance. So take us out on that, Jennifer, from the standpoint of kind of what our understanding from the discovery was for SwimKids.
Well, one of the things that comes to mind as you're talking about capacity is the impact of that, not only financially, but on every other layer of the hierarchy of needs, right? So if you're looking at, you have 29% capacity, flip that around, you essentially have 71% of opportunity. There is not being, that time's not being utilized in the most effective or productive way, right? So for employees, that can be frustrating because that usually what happens is we fill the space. You don't just say, okay, go home, we'll see you tomorrow. You usually have them doing wasteful things that just pop up every day, but they're not necessarily things that are tied back to the organizational strategy. And just as a reminder, if you recall, one of the statistics we threw out there on the very first show was that 95% of frontline employees don't understand how their daily tasks relate back to that strategy. So for them, it's a very clear capacity means saving lives, which supports strategy, right?
And you'll remember, listeners, that we said that if an associate doesn't know exactly what they're supposed to do, what do they do in replacement for that? They default to what they think is right.
Right.
And that may or may not connect, right? So think of that if you're a crewing team at a university and you are dependent on everyone hitting the stroke at exactly the same time, and people on the boat are saying, no, you know what? We don't need to do that. I'm going to just stroke when I want to, and they're going to stroke when they want to, and we're not going to follow the cadence of the boatswain. That is a losing proposition, and yet it happens every day in organizations.
You know, and I am not an expert in this capacity, but when you think about it from that domain, when you talk about rowing, there's a few different components that fit into it. One is the speed of which you're rowing, right? So if you've got some people going full steam ahead and some people just kind of taking their time and they're on two different sides of the boat, you're just going to start circling around.
That's right.
And then two, you've also got direction. So if I'm working in one direction and someone else thinks we should be going in a different direction, you're probably not going to go anywhere. Or else you're going to go somewhere that neither of you ultimately want to go. And so you have to hit both. Are we doing the things we're supposed to be doing? Are we going in the right direction? And are we on the same page around speed of how quickly we're doing those things to see, are you really getting to your end goal?
Right. So it's balanced activity around a common purpose with everybody understanding what they need to do, which by definition is standard work. Okay. All right. So let's go next to customer value. So in customer value, it's all about tapping into demand. And a little bit of what they talked with us about was that the marketing programs and so forth that they've done have not necessarily been as successful as they've wanted. So that's an opportunity for them to look at that. They know there's demand out there. They know there's a lot of children being born and little kids under the age of 4. There's an opportunity to really meet those needs. But the question is, does their audience, does their customer base understand that they exist? So that's that first part of customer value, is tapping into demand.
And it's a different world when you think about marketing from what it was, obviously, when they first started, but even 5-10 years ago. I mean, social media is king, right? So they have mentioned that they've got a Facebook page, and a lot of businesses are starting to get into different areas, but we don't market in the same way. Word of mouth in today's world is just not enough, right? It's really word of social media as opposed to word of mouth, and it's about how are we getting our message out in a way that connects with the people who potentially need our service.
Well, and a lot of that has to be with optimization. When you're putting the message out, there are all sorts of metrics to make sure you're reaching the people you want to reach, which, as you said, this parents of young kids, I imagine they want to, sort of look for opportunities to do that. I also thought, everyone has, in the South, everyone has a community pool. Is there any way to reach them there? If they go to the pool with their kids and they see maybe a flyer or something, I don't even know if that's available, but to let them know this program is available.
Right. So the market is noisy. It always is. And there's a million ways to get information, and people are getting information that way. So there is a science to marketing as well. One of the approaches that we often recommend is affinity marketing, which uses a way of being able to reach your audience on the things they're interested in and then create a call to action. But let me go to the next point of customer value. So the next point is exceeding customer expectations. So we learned they're doing that. If you go to SwimKids of Georgia, you're going to have a great experience. They will exceed customer expectations. And the third thing is inspire loyalty. They'll inspire loyalty. And remember, word of mouth's the best. Like, hey, where did you teach your 2-year-old how to swim? SwimKids of Georgia. Well, tell me about that. It was great, loved it, really, really good, really professional, great environment, all that sort of thing. That's how you build your business. So talk to us a little bit about that, Jennifer, in terms of that customer value, how your approach to your business can actually build that.
So 2 thoughts come to mind. One is, one of the pieces you mentioned is when you think about the customer sharing their story, there's instant credibility there, right? You're not selling at that point, you're sharing, which makes a big difference. The second thing that comes to mind, and I don't want us to get too detailed because it probably could be its own show, is when you think about a technique known as the condo analysis. So businesses can use a condo model, and essentially if you think about this from the perspective of an X and a Y axis, you have on your Y axis, you have your customer value, and on your X axis, you have organizational effectiveness. So when you think about organizationally, how are we doing in the market, you have basic expectations that you need to be able to provide. So for instance, if you were to walk into a Starbucks and they say, oh, we're out of coffee, well, that's a problem. You're a coffee shop, right? So there are basic things that you need to be able to provide that just allow you to even compete. The next level is you start to get into your performance needs. So what are those things that differentiate you from your market? So these are the things that typically more is better. The more you can provide, the better service that you can provide, the more timely it can be, the higher quality it can be. Whatever your business is, it's what's going to outcompete other individuals in your market. And then the third category would be considered delighters. So what are those things that customers don't expect that you can offer to them and still remain profitable? You don't want to go bankrupt trying to offer a delighter because they don't necessarily need that, but it just puts you out over the top. And those are those things when you consistently offer your performance, your basic needs, and you're constantly revamping and revising your performance needs and still able to offer delighters, you create loyalty for your customers.
Exactly right. So for the listeners, again, you can see that Kano model if you click on the tap into demand box on your organizational hierarchy of needs. It will take you to information. Keep clicking, and it'll get you to the Kano model of what Jennifer was just talking about. And that is a really interesting and important thing to understand. So for delighters, let me just give a couple examples of delighters. Everybody knows that Apple has a delightful product. And when they first came out with their iPod, everybody wanted one.
Right.
Why? Was it just because it was that cool little white thing and it was better than the other MP3 companies? No, it was because of iTunes. It was a latent they understood what the market needed when their competitors didn't. And when they put that together and you had an MP3 player that you could tap into a repository of music and videos and so forth, game changer, and they owned the market. We were talking yesterday to a hospital that we work with, and they understood that when people come into the hospital, they feel confused. They don't know where to go. They don't, so they have divided up the responsibilities of their leaders, that they spend 2 hours a week up in the front entrance to greet. So anytime you come in their hospital, you are meeting a leader of that hospital, and they are asking you, how can we help you? And if you need directions, they take you there.
That is huge.
That's a delighter. So it's a big differentiator. So those are opportunities for every organization. And when you're talking about customer value, being able to understand what the must-haves, which Jennifer described, are versus the differentiators versus the delighters is actually a big deal. So that's the Kano model, K-A-N-O. You can find it on the Leader Dialogue website. It's there through that tap into demand box.
One thing I want to add before you move on that is also an important component of that that's often overlooked, again, would be what we call indifferences. So what are the things that we are spending our time and money on as a business that customers don't really care about? So you don't want to waste your resources, waste your efforts on things that they don't necessarily make them happy, they don't necessarily make them upset. So instead, repurpose that time, repurpose those resources to go into something that does differentiate your company.
All right, absolutely. All right, so let's get back to SwimKids of Georgia and let's talk about organizational effectiveness. So their capacity is at 29%. I think that was a little shocking for them.
Yep, Jessica said it was profound, I recall. It was interesting.
Yeah, but by the way, that's the advantage of this. There are learnings for every organization. And when you begin to compare yourself to what is in the organizational hierarchy of needs, you start to go, so that's where an opportunity is. So talk to us a little bit about capacity and what that could mean for SwimKids of Georgia.
So one thing that I would mention is that for a lot of businesses, if you were to go talk to businesses and ask them, hey, are you busy? They're going to say, oh, we're swamped. I'm working all the time, right? I have calls nonstop. I'm always getting questions from my employees. It's not a question of busyness. Capacity is not the same thing as activity, which again, another interesting comment we heard yesterday at one of our workshops was that activity does not necessarily translate to results.
Yes.
And there's that feeling of busyness sometimes that we lose sight of, again, what is our opportunity. So capacity is looking at, based on the resources that you have, the services that you provide, the demand that you are currently providing or offering to individuals, and then the potential opportunity of what you could provide to individuals based on your resources and services. So in this case, if you were to look at, for instance, for SwimKids of Georgia, how much time can their instructors be in the pool? How many lessons could they do per instructor, per hour, things of that nature? That's where you start to look at capacity. Now, some of that can be stolen when either you're not scheduling at an optimized rate, or perhaps you've got group sessions. Jessica talked a lot about makeup sessions, whereas you don't necessarily offer makeup sessions when it's a group session. And so if you're doing that, that's a session that you're not necessarily getting paid for because it should have been in a different session. So those are types of instances for them, and you can, of course, relate that to any other type of business when you're starting to think about capacity.
Right. So if they take a close look at their business, and they understand what they're trying to accomplish, which we know they know what they're trying to accomplish, and they apply some of this strategy execution science, they can begin to understand how to maximize their capacity and throughput.
Right. And think about the impact on that. So for this, in this instance, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars if they were to optimize their capacity. In a small business, that's not a small fee, right? I mean, that's significant because, again, that just enables you to further your mission and provide more lessons for more kids.
Right, exactly. So SwimKids of Georgia is a classic example of what we encounter. And they happen to be a small business, but we see the same thing in hospitals. We see the same thing in manufacturing companies. We see the same thing in schools. We see the same thing in government organizations. It's a very, very common challenge of not being able to fully complete or fulfill your mission and purpose because the things that you do every day are not optimized, is the term you used before.
How do you go about deciding what activities are necessary versus the busyness or the things that are wasting time, energy, and costing you money?
That is such a good question. So one of the things that we use, and if you look at lean methodology, is they evaluate any process based on what we call is what's your value stream. So what that means is that based on my business, if I'm offering a product or a service to my customer, what are the essential steps that I have to go through to be able to provide that service or that product to them. Now, naturally, we tend to get a lot of waste inside of that, and that's what lean ultimately is it's talking to you about how do you eliminate a lot of the waste in your process that ultimately gives you increased value for your customer. And so when you step back and put on the shades of the customer instead of what we as business people, hospital people, teachers, education people, whatever, we think that the customer wants, it's sometimes very different. And it can be a little bit of when you're looking at one thing, I assume one thing, doesn't necessarily mean that's what you want, right?
And often the structure of an organization is based on what's convenient for the people that work there
Right.
and or the owners.
Right.
Right? So it worked well for us to structure this way. Oh, that's right. The customer is going to have to access that, and it turns out it's not the most efficient. I'll give you a classic example that I think everyone can relate to. How many of you on this that are listening to this program have called into a business and gotten the message, we have just changed our call-in system. Press 1 to talk to so-and-so. Press 2 to get to this department. Press 3, and by the time you're at 7, you're ready to pull your hair out.
Yes.
Because, by the way, as a customer, you want to talk to a person.
And how, I think those all came about thinking that would save time and that would save resources. But I have to tell you, that will turn me off of a business quicker than anything. I took my car in for service. The technician called me and I said, let me check on whether we want to do that stuff. Can I call you right back? He said, yes. At that point, it would have been great for him to give me a direct line. I called back on the number he gave me and I went to that darn voicemail and then got disconnected 3 times.
So by the way, you know how that decision was made. And it's made every day in businesses. How do we efficiently manage what we have to do? We have labor costs, we have process costs, and so we're just going to make a decision. Everybody else is doing it, by the way. So we're going to make a decision that we think is going to be more cost effective. The question really is, have you listened to the voice of your customer? What do they want? And how are you going to be able to delight them and differentiate? So a must-have is you have to have a phone. Right? I mean, you got to have a phone. Okay, great. So that's a must-have. But the organizations that differentiate recognize that that phone is an opportunity to engage the customer in a different way and to be able to actually translate into a delighter, which is every time they call. Now, that may cost more, but if it increases your market pull and ultimately increases your ability to more efficiently meet that customer need, you can pay for it on the back end. So, by the way, I'm not advocating that every organization do that. I'm using that as an example of the thoughtful process of listening to your customer, which is customer value, and then being able to translate that into organizational effectiveness. And as you do that, you're driving performance.
And there's a balance there that's a constant pull. So you mentioned voice of customer, which is where we're looking at our customer value and what is it that my customers ultimately want, whether they know it or not. Because again, there are a lot of things that they don't necessarily think to say, oh, well, I want you to make sure you have a barista who can make me coffee when I walk into a coffee shop. It's an expectation. But on the flip side, there's the voice of business. And that's what we can currently offer. We have what we consider our voice of process. So what are we capable of providing? Whether or not that's aligned to the customer value can be a completely different story. So when you're looking at that balance, what typically happens in every organization is the voice of business and the voice of employee, that wins. And it weighs down to where the customer value is a little diluted. So because you're getting what we can give. And perfect example, hospital emergency rooms. I mean, we know they're providing an essential service, they're providing value, but I've never talked to someone that says, all right, we're going to the emergency room to wait. We're so excited. Obviously, you don't want to be there at all. But essentially, and it's almost a badge of honor when you go and you come back and you're like, wow, I just waited in the emergency room for 8 hours. Oh, that's nothing. It was 10 hours for me.
Right, so that shouldn't be something to brag about.
But that's what happens is we think about, what is it that our customers want? They don't want to wait, right? They want to go in, they want to have the service they need, and they want to go home because nobody wants to be in a hospital unless you're having a baby. That's pretty much one of the few times that you're happy to be there.
Right. So you go in and you get a ticket to wait so you can wait.
Right.
Perfect. Yeah. So in this customer value, we often talk about things that just are not delivering value. And that as you analyze that, we call it waste. Now, people, when they think of waste, they think of trash. They think of something that you are going to take out and put at the curb. But that's not really what we're talking about. So explain that, Jennifer, a little bit to the listeners. Waste, when you're talking about customer value, is what, and how do you go about doing that?
Right. So in a nutshell, when you look at waste, one of the common phrases we often say is one person's trash is another person's treasure.
Right.
Well, Lean says that's actually not the case, because what we're doing here is we're looking at it from the customer's perspective, not necessarily you as an employee's perspective. And there's an acronym for there are 8 different types of waste. I use the acronym downtime. It's a common acronym, and we can talk about them more, but these can be things like defects, errors, because they result in rework, which slows down your process, and nobody wants to have to wait and do something over again. Overproduction, so if you're making more of something than what you need, and
Right.
it's not giving you, you're producing too much, there's waste, dollars,
Right.
time in there. Waiting in and of itself is actually a waste. Non-standard or over processing, so if I call you and then I text you and then I send you an email to see if you got my message, that's over processing. Transportation, really good example for businesses that have multiple locations or footprints. Intellect, so when we're not maximizing the knowledge base of our employees and we're using it in we're underutilizing them. Motion, which is also looking at just moving things and things being placed and organized effectively, and then excessive inventory. So that's downtime. Those are the 8 wastes, and we can talk more about
So
them.
let's put this together because we need to wrap up.
Right.
But let's put this together for the listeners. So organizational effectiveness is really understanding your business and how you're deploying all of your resources. In this case, the pool, your trainers, your front desk, your time, and so forth, to be able to deliver value to your customer. And you need to be able to evaluate that in a logical, organized, disciplined way that, in this case, we're helping SwimKids of Georgia do. And that will allow them to maximize their capacity. And when they do that, they can add hundreds of thousands of dollars to their business. And this is a small business. So they can literally increase their capacity to a maximum of 71% more. Is that right?
That's right. And of course, save lives.
Which is ultimately what they're about. So shout out again to Nadyne and Jessica for doing such a great job with their business, differentiating themselves well, getting to high value customer feedback from their Yelp scores and lots of customer loyalty. So like many businesses out there, they're doing a great job. The point is they can do better. And that's what this radio program is all about. How do you maximize your performance by understanding your organizational needs hierarchy and understand how to leverage that, and that's what we're here for.
And that means customers are happier, you're making more money, things are running smoother, and you're probably going to keep around your employees.
Right. That's right.
Well, thank you for joining us on Leader Dialogue, presented by SOAR Vision Group and the Baldridge Foundation. Remember to tune in every Friday at 1 Eastern Time in the afternoon to listen to our live weekly broadcast. Now, to hear this episode again or to listen to any of our previous Leader Dialogue episodes, you can go visit businessradiox.com. You select the Gwinnett Studio and then select Leader Dialogue. On behalf of the hosts, Ben and Jennifer, thank you so much yet again. I'm always learning stuff from you. Also,
Great.
from our producers, Mike and Trey, I'm Duffy Dixon. We'll see you next time on Leader Dialogue on Business Radio X.